Now, Mali's government has given the French ambassador 72 hours to leave the country, and that's according to the statement from the government. This is the result of outrageous comments by the French authorities regarding the country's transitional government. On Friday, French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said that the Mali's ruling junta was out of control amid escalating tensions between the West African states and its European partners over military cooperation and elections. He also called the junta illegitimate. French Defense Minister Florence Parler has reportedly said that French troops would not stay in Mali if the price was too high. For some analysis about the security situation in the region, we're now joined by Ornella Moderan, who's the Sahel program head at the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So we've seen coups in this region of late, military juntas taking over. And whilst the focus has been on restoring constitutional democracy and civilian rule, there have been insurgencies taking place in the region. And I wonder if, because of what's happening politically, that these insurgents may be emboldened given the disruption that's taking place.
Well, in fact, the Sahel has been facing an extremely serious security crisis for a decade now. It started in 2012. It is after years and years of a deteriorating security situation that we started seeing some of the coups that we're now grappling with. One of the impact this has, of course, is that the coups themselves somehow affect the capacity of central states to remain in control. Now, in a country like Mali, where I am, but also in neighboring Burkina Faso, where another coup recently took place, one of the arguments that are put forward by the military conducting these coups is specifically that the incapacity of civilian elected governments to restore the country to peace and security. So one important thing to look at going forward will be whether whether a military rule will equate in a betterment of the security situation. This isn't something we have seen of yet, but that remains one of the major claims.
What is at the heart of this insurgency in the Sahel? What are these groups wanting as an end goal?
That is a very good question. I mean, we have a variety of groups, actually. There isn't such a thing as one Sahel crisis. There is a multiplicity of overlapping crises. So on the one hand, you have the jihadist crisis, which involves stakeholders either affiliated with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb or with the Islamic State. All of them are using a reference base that relates to Islam as a political order, but at the same time, they also use the grievances of communities around things like access to natural resources, the lack of social services, the lack of basic social justice, and such issues in order to take root. So the situation there is quite complex. And on top of that, you also have a number of community-based armed groups, which essentially try and, at least claim to protect themselves in a context where the state is vastly absent, especially in the rural areas. So this all creates a very confused environment in which it's very difficult to separate one armed actors from the other.
In terms of trying to deal with the insecurity, a lot of these countries have gotten the assistance from the international community. France in particular has been there. What role do these international players play? Do they help or exacerbate the situation?
Well, in theory, their stated intention is to help. So this includes, of course, bilateral cooperation with a number of Western countries, but it also includes multilateral engagement with the European Union, with the UN, and other actors. One of the major problems, I think, is that 10 years into the crisis, these huge amounts of external assistance that have been mobilized are not translating into an improvement of the security situation. So it's very difficult for people on the ground to understand how comes that there are thousands of soldiers from other countries to help, but the situation keeps deteriorating. Now, of course, this apparent failure is not only the failure of external stakeholders, because the armed forces of Mali, of Burkina, of Niger, and of all the countries affected by this crisis are also involved. So it is a collective failure until now, which I think speaks more to the kind of approach that's being used. Right now, we have been stuck in a strategy to fight insecurity that's military-driven, that's hyper-militarized, and this is something that hasn't yielded the expected results. So perhaps one of the things that are needed is more of a political approach, in fact, in which the military aspect should be one element, but probably isn't enough on its own to win the battle over.
All right, political solution, but that would suggest sitting down with the enemy, whoever that might be. And I just wonder if you talk about many insurgencies, are these groups known that you can even bring them to a table and say that we're talking to the right people who represent by and large those groups?
The answer is yes, on the side of groups affiliated with, yes for some of these groups. It's very difficult to identify some of the leaders, but for groups like the Al-Qaeda affiliated Jinim in Mali, for instance, or the Al-Qaeda affiliated Katiba Masina, it's quite clear who is behind. In fact, previous Malian governments had indicated their intention to start such dialogue. So this is a policy option that has been considered in the past and that might again in the future. Now, on top of that, I think when I say political solution, it's of course through a form of dialogue with those, with parts of this group that would welcome this, but it's also looking at the root causes of people's decision to join these groups beyond religion. So there are root causes in social frustrations, in anger against corruption, against a failing justice system, things like that can be solved through political engagement, in fact.
All right. This seems pretty complex, and with decades having passed by, is there any sense or indications that some of these groups even want to come to the table and resolve these issues?
Some of them, yes, have indicated in the past that they would welcome the opportunity to engage in a dialogue at a national level with national stakeholders. This isn't a majority opinion. Not all of the groups have made such statements, but some of the most influential have. So looking forward, should this option be considered in the future, some of the key elements for the states to wonder will be, what is there to discuss, and what are the trade-offs that would be okay to consider? Because obviously, if you go into a negotiation, this implies giving some and taking some. So what would be a reasonable and acceptable middle ground? I think this is one of the key questions that the countries in the region are yet to figure out.
You were talking a little bit earlier and giving us an indicator that part of the solution might be taking away some of the incentives and some of the support that they might be getting from civilians. If that is taken away, do you think that people might get tired of this and that might make it difficult for these militants to continue doing their work? I mean, we've seen in other countries where determined militants will continue regardless.
Yes, well, I mean, it would definitely cut some grass under their feet, but it probably wouldn't be enough. So, I mean, if dialogue is considered as a serious option, then it would have to involve different forms of dialogue. One element should be negotiations. I mean, almost parks-based negotiation, trying to figure out what can get people to drop weapons.
Yeah.
Another element would be the doctrinal kind of dialogue, looking at specific elements of religion for those who have joined because of religious reasons. Another element would, I think, have to be a dialogue about the governance and political practices in the country to elicit reforms that could substantially address people's grievances. And then another element would have to be actually offering alternatives, offering options out of the violence economy. This means looking at social reinsertion and things like that. So it would take a lot of time and energy, and it probably would leave the time for members of these groups who aren't willing to engage in such on such a path to actually create more problems. So yes, it would be a challenging path either way.
Who is supporting these militants? And I'm just thinking that, you know, for something that's going on for decades, the longer it goes on, the more organized they become and the harder it becomes to try and untangle everything.
That's another great question. I mean, there is a number of assumptions made about, you know, the involvement of foreign powers and things like that. I don't have any evidence of that, so I won't be supporting those points. One thing that's clear is that over the years, the various jihadi groups in the region have developed the capacity to fund themselves locally through things like, you know, hostage taking for ransom, or extortion through a form of, well, through essentially an illegal taxation system, to castle rustling and things like that. So they have developed, I mean, whether or not they're supported from the outside, one thing that's clear is that they have developed the capacity to fund themselves by predating on local communities as well.
Ornella, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for your insights about the security situation in the Sahel region. Thank you for your time tonight.